It says it's looks like this in your handouts. And then the other one is a 7-page summary from the U.S. Department of Education. It's a fact sheet. And so that's where I made my PowerPoint from. Sometimes it's easier for me to explain something, and if I make my own PowerPoint and teach off someone else's. So what we wanted to do tonight was just start to give you some of the information that we're getting about the American Relief Plan Act. And so, and what it means. We don't have some information for what it means on the bottom line for RIM, but we wanted to give you some information. So next slide. I'd just like to share some of the basic facts. This public law 117-2 was enacted on March 11th, 2021. It provides a total of $125.4 billion to the states and K-12 school districts to help reopen safely and for safe operation of schools to address the impact of the coronavirus pandemic. It includes $3 billion for special education and additional funding for special populations of students, such as homeless foster. California is to receive $13.2 billion of that amount, and the amount for RIM is yet to be determined or received. There are several calculations or calculators out there, but we want to wait to get the official amount, which is a pass-through from the state to San Bernardino County to us, because that means the state will certify that amount before we get it. So that way we know what we're planning for. So then I kind of broke the slides down into the next slide talks about what's the state requirements for that money. And then I'm going to get to district requirements. So that's the federal money. How's that going to come to the state and what states must do? States must allocate 90% of the total funds out to LEAs or school districts to help meet a wide range of needs arising from the pandemic. The funds to be allocated by the state to LEAs are on the basis of the respective shares of funds received under Title I. There are 3 state reservations for activities and interventions that respond to students' academic, social, emotional needs for underrepresented student subgroups. So again, these are the state requirements, what they have to do with the money and report back to the federal government. 5% of the state money they must use to address learning loss, 1% for evidence-based summer enrichment programs, 1% for evidence-based comprehensive after-school programs, and they can retain up to 1% of that for administrative costs. So what does that mean for school districts? That's the next slide. So 20% of the funds must address learning loss through the implementation of evidence-based interventions, and they must ensure that those interventions respond to students' social, emotional, and academic needs, and the disproportionate impact on underrepresented subgroups, such as extended day, after school, summer enrichment, or extended year programs. The remaining LEA funds may be used in a wide range of activities. What I noticed in reading and studying for tonight to do the little summary, everything relates back to evidence-based. So all the strategies and the things that we implement, even if it's above and beyond that 20%, they want some evidence-based, research-based, some things like that tied to it. So some of the things that you could do are develop and implement public health protocols to the greatest extent possible. Coordinating response efforts to COVID-19, professional development on sanitizing and cleaning, purchasing supplies for cleaning and sanitizing, repairing and improving school facilities and air quality, addressing the needs of children from underrepresented subgroups, planning or implementing activities during long-term closures, including meals and technology, purchasing educational technology, including hardware, software, connectivity, and adaptive equipment, providing mental health services through evidence-based full-service community schools and hiring of counselors, summer learning after-school programs, and addressing learning loss, other services that are necessary to maintain operation and continuity of services. Do we know what all those things mean yet? No. So we're going to talk about a plan for those things on the next slide. So within 30 days of receiving the official certified amount. Districts must make public on its website a plan for the safe return to in-person instruction and continuity of services. Before making the plan available, the LA must seek in public input and will be brought to board. So that's a very short timeline when we look at board meetings. That could be a hint that we might need an additional board meeting depending on the date of when we receive those funds. Because we'll have 30 days to get that plan written and get comments, get approved, and get published. So your funds may be used for pre-award costs dating back to March 13th of 2020, when the national emergency was declared. You have a spending deadline available for obligation through LEAs through September 30th of 2023. So I'm assuming that when the plan comes out, as far as they don't have any guiding documents yet, but when they come out, that they would have it be, that would be the closing date, would be that expenditure date, September 30th, 2023. So I've given you information to back that up. Jenny's done some work on looking at the funds. We are meeting in cabinet on Monday to discuss all of the COVID funds we received, how much we've used, what we have left, what are the purposes, what have they been spent on, and then we're planning for those interventions and things, learning loss, summer school. So making sure that we've allocated an amount, but we're going to be planning without a number at this point. So we have some hints, but we're not quite sure. So without wanting to say that we're getting this amount, we'll wait till we get that state certified amount. And then we just wanted to, I know Jenny has some, do you want to talk about any of those handouts that you gave them? And then we can just open it up for any, what we can answer. Again, my knowledge is based upon reading this document. So, but we wanted to bring it to your attention because this is the first time in the monies that that's been so strict upon evidence-based, research-based strategies and data. So we want to make sure that that's a different expectation than the monies we received on the past.
I just also wanted to let you know in your Dropbox, we included 2 documents. One was a table form of all the COVID funds we've received to date, and it's by kind of, we call them pots of money, but it's by resource code with a brief explanation of the allowable uses. I mean, we can do a deeper dive to the nitty gritty, and it's pages worth if we can look at the actual CDC website. And then what we've spent to date, maybe in some planned expenditures that wouldn't have hit the books yet, and then the remaining funds. And you can see the different names. We can go through it. I don't know if any of you had a chance to look at it yet. Okay. And then in a little more detail is just the same concept, but by resource. And then by major category, what our expenditures been, and tying into the remaining funds. So part of the American Rescue Plan Act, we are going to refer to it mostly as ESSER 3, because with, on the federal side, we've got ESSER 1, ESSER 2, which we haven't even received those funds yet, and now we have ESSER 3. So, and they do build, the allowable uses do really, up until ESSER 3, were built upon the allowable uses under the CARES Act. So it would, as we've gotten additional allocation of funds, it would be okay, everything the CARES Act would allow you to spend on, and maybe they would add things to it. ESSER 3 was the first one that was really, yes, it's built on the CARES Act, then added the caveats on, even a sanitizing purchase or equipment for air quality, we would have to, tie that into a strategic plan or data-driven. Why would an air cleaner of this one be better than another one? So it's just a little bit more thoughtfulness in purchasing, but it still can be used for things like PPE, hand sanitizer, equipment custodians may need. So, but it just has to be a little bit more thoughtful.
I do think it'll be interesting now that we have students back on campuses and secondary and the rest of elementary coming back next week. We will plan a debrief time with our principals because we think we've thought of everything. Do we have enough of everything? Have we thought of everything? What else could they need? So part of that is looking at that kind of PPE aspect and the things that we've already purchased.
Does one piece of material work better than another now that we've bought several items and they're actually being used, type of thing?
Are there any board comments?
In the webinar from Capital Advisors, Kevin Gordon stressed also not only that it's evidence, whatever you do for support, it's evidence-based research, but he also stressed that assessments are essential. Assessments to collect data, to set up the interventions, the supports, and so that it's targeted intervention to address the story that the data tells you, and know where your kids are at and what are the gaps and what are you going to do and how, and that ties into then these are the things that we're going to do because we know based on evidence this will be successful in addressing those particular gaps. So he stressed a lot about the assessments and gathering that data for the gaps is essential. And then knowing that sometimes our students don't take those assessments very seriously. I'll just say 11th graders sometimes don't take the SBAC seriously. One of the things that you need to do is really work with students to create their buy-in and how they're going to benefit by taking their assessments seriously. So that Kevin pointed out is going to be a challenge, especially with the older ones, since there's not, it always has been challenge.
Yeah, and because most of the dollars, except for the new 86 funding, which is state dollars, and then we've got a couple small pockets of state money. On the federal side, all of these funds will be subject to the single audit guide, just like Title I or child nutrition currently is. And because of it's not as cut and dry, and each one may build on top of each other, school services is having a separate 2-day conference next month just on preparing business staff on what to expect for the audit. So then we can make these purchases understanding what will be needed when the auditors come and review them, either our internal auditors or county auditors or state auditors. So, because it's going to get a little bit more complicated, we want to make sure we dot every I, cross every T, make sure we know exactly what our expectations are. There's actually a 2-day training that we'll go to. So we know what we have to do when we start spending the money to be in compliance.
I really, really like the spreadsheet, the summary of COVID-19. It's what you might help my iPad. So used to being able to just talk. I really like how you simplified and made this chart. This is a fantastic tool. I'm not understanding ESSER 2 versus ESSER 3, and I think you just explained it, but it went right past me in terms of, there's a lot of money that is estimated for ESSER 2, and then there will be additional funding for ESSER 3.
That's correct. We haven't even received our funds for ESSER 2 and the federal stimulus package. This American Rescue Act was signed, and we're immediately getting additional funds with ESSER 3, which really builds on ESSER 2 and adds some restrictions to it. So ESSER 3 is really more restrictive than ESSER 2, which ESSER 2 really added more allowable expenditures from the CARES Act because it started addressing HVAC and some ventilation and some things that we really would, on the facility side. And so it really, on ESSER 3, it kind of went maybe a step backwards in the restriction that and how specifically they want to target these funds, where ESSER 2 gave us a little bit more allowable uses than ESSER 1.
And ESSER 2 was part of the COVID relief in December.
They call it the December federal money. We had March federal money, December federal money,
Yeah.
and we have a new March federal money.
Kevin was referring it as the December COVID relief.
Yeah.
And just to make sure I understand as well, I know historically, like with special ed funding, money's been promised, but not necessarily received. Is this money that we're confident that we are going to?
I wouldn't compare this with how the federal government funds special ed.
Okay,
Because we never get an actual, they say what they should fund us, but then they really do tell us, but we're only going to give you this. So where they're actually going to say, no, we're going to give you this, and we'll start spending once we get that certification, which should happen, within the next week or two. And we are getting EdSource, school services, and county schools are both trying to do some internal calculations, what they think each district may get, but because it's based on Title I, which is a federal nationwide program, and then within our state, on the LCAP, we were able to estimate it fairly close because we knew what our proportionate share is. It's harder to determine what our proportional share is of Title I because not every district receives Title I. So it's a little bit harder to know, well, what's Grim's share? And then the estimates that we are getting, there's $1 million or $2 difference between two numbers. And so at this point, we feel we can't even, we're going to be wrong with whatever we tell you today. So we'd rather just wait and see and not give you something too high and then say, oh, we're not really going to have that much. So
Jenny, what are our plans for, or if we have them right now, for the ESSER 2 funds that we have on hand?
we've only started to plan those funds right now. Some negotiated items that we've done with our teachers union would fall into this category, and some expenses at the site level that we're addressing immediately once we open. Although some of those can also fit into the state incentive grant. So sometimes we'll have to say, well, we're going to do this, and maybe it fits into 3 of these pots. And which is best when it's all allowable. We may have to just decide that by the date to spend it. So maybe we, kind of like an inventory, first in, first out type of thing. So right now we might have some similar items in different pots and say, well, we just need to then pick one because maybe one pot's less restricted. So let's use that money first, or use it restricted first to save the unrestricted. So we'll have to do some of that analysis with really having all of them up on a sheet of paper or Excel spreadsheet and say, okay, we're starting to need some things and negotiate some things. And then it fits into 3 pots. Where would we like to have it fall?
The other thing, Bill, is, which I found interesting, is the December COVID monies, ESSER 2, the plan for spending those monies, you have 6 months.
Right.
And yet the ESSER 3, the ARP, you have 30 days from the time you receive the monies. And so I just thought that was weird. That,
And the state money is June 1st.
yes, what, May 1st, in May?
June 1st, by June 1st.
Yeah,
Which some of these plans will be able to be tweaked very slightly and then qualify for the next plan. So our state plan, they said, will work really well for the federal plan, just with maybe a couple tweaks. So we don't have to do 2 different plans.
And which of the funds can be used for summer school and the concerns that we obviously have about learning loss?
Almost all of them.
All of them.
So can address, learning loss and extended year and student services is addressed in every pot of money.
That's what I thought.
Well, thank you, Jenny. You answered my question that I was going to ask about auditing, because I'm sure that's going to be very complex process. But my other question that I had, since we are talking about this 30-day window, that's a very tight timeline. Do we already have some prioritized needs that we know we'll want to use for these ESSER 3 funds so that it reduces that, streamlines as best as possible that 30-day window?
We've been gathering ideas from administrators, from negotiation meetings, from union members, unit members on some ideas. Cabinet has a brainstorm list that we've been brainstorming on for Monday in our cabinet agenda. So we have some ideas. That's why we're trying to get a jump start on it this week with brainstorming and listening to folks, and that people have talked to Mr. Beal. And so we're putting those ideas down in that cabinet discussion for Monday. That's why we're going to get a start on that. So we have some thoughts, but we're putting them all together because maybe Heather heard something else or Derek heard something else. So we've started to list them in our discussion for Monday.
Thanks. And I assume with a lot of these funds that I'm looking at, not a lot of them can be used for facility needs other than something, say, like HVAC or air ventilation, it seems like, right?
Well, there's an interpretation, and I'm going to, Michelle's just hearing this for the first time, so I apologize. There's an interpretation on what a site needs for the health and safety of their students in a couple of these. So, for instance, we have a dishwasher that's been broken for several years. I mean, most of our cafeteria equipment is 30 years old. And so we have certain people who wash a lot of dishes by hand. Well, can some of these funds be used then to upgrade some of our sanitation and cleaning equipment in the kitchen that we would have needed, like Measure A to pass to be able to address some of these needs? So with some vague allowances, we can probably tie some facility related when it's addressing, cleanliness and safety of students. So I'm springing this on you. I'm sorry, Michelle. So yeah, this is what I was on one of my cabinet items for Monday. So we were talking today, that we have a freezer down and we have food loss, and that's a financial hit. So what can we do? That we have freezers that when they defrost and they leak, and there could be a slip and fall. So there's some facility issues that when we really look at the language and then like that data driven and that critical look that, okay, yes, especially then when we get trained, what the auditors will look at, we can probably address some things that we don't have the general fund monies for, and then make some improvements besides just windows or, tweaks to the current HVAC systems.
Thank you.
So thinking that once the funding is announced, 30 days to develop a plan. However, we don't have guidelines from the state in terms of what will be required from us as a district come August. So we're going to have some form of a crystal ball in terms of how we're planning to spend the money without knowing what rules we need to follow. Is that a fair statement?
That's a fair assumption.
Yes.
But there is a important phrase that's been used with the 30 days, and it's plans for safe return to in-person instruction, which we've already started that process. So I think there is more opportunity right now, even in the safety plans that we've already put together, that you've put together, that fit into that plan that then would be presented as a part of the presentation.
Yeah, in fact, Kevin Gordon mentioned that in his briefing, that we use what we've already done, and the safety plan is something that he suggests we tweak that. We've already done a lot of hard work, Michelle's done already a lot of hard work on that, and then we tweak that. So really that plan could already be 90% done.
There's only like 6 versions of that plan written.
Which means you have a lot of things that you can put in there.
Yeah.
With only 30 days to figure out how to spend this large number, I'm guessing it is, hopefully. Will there be an amendments process that's available to districts, do you think, especially given that it needs to be spent over a couple of years?
I think that there's some vagueness that we would have and some generalities in the plan. So, I mean, we could say, you know, we're going to maintain, real similar to the LCAP, we're going to maintain these services, we're going to continue these services, we're going to add these services, and maybe the nitty gritty, like how and what person that is or what department that is, you know, can come later, because, you know, we could be having to work on a plan, we won't even have an audit guide yet. So the audit guide for this year just was published. So, and we're in March. So I think that there's going to be some flexibility and then some, and, you know, acceptable vagueness that we kind of no sweat on.
Yeah, well, with so much time, well, and with a couple of years needing to spend however much money it is, I assume there needs to be flexibility for a district, because what they develop over the course of 30 days in, say, April 2021 might not line up with the needs come August. So I'm glad that there was some flexibility.
And they could very well, somewhere with the LCAP, have like an annual report update that's brought to board, and, you know, opportunities to tweak. I don't think if we say we want to do something now and then we realize it's maybe even not possible, then we would be penalized for that.
So I have a question on the assessments part, and where are we at in regards to gathering that information about the gaps and the actual loss of learning, and how, so that we have that kind of data to work with? Where are we at on that? Or is that too much of a question?
I don't think I would be the one to answer that. So,
When I'm looking at Heather, maybe that could be part of the LCAP discussion.
Thank you, Heather. Can you put that in the back of your mind? Because I know that that was super emphasized in Kevin Gordon's briefing. And so I just want to be able to see, like, based on your presentations throughout the year, I'm kind of figuring out where we are in elementary versus secondary, but if we could just have a plan for how to up the ante, so to speak. You want to talk about that, right? No, in your LCAP.
I think it's just important for us to make sure we're not waiting till the last minute. We don't need to, because we've already done so much work. And then I think that's the thing to realize, is that move forward with what you've got, make plans now. Don't feel like you have to wait for them to figure it all out.
Yes, we started. We're not waiting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good, thanks. So 8.2, student learning and achievement, local control and accountability plan, LCAP, stakeholder groups input for the 3-year LCAP cycle, 2021 through 2024. Heather Dominguez, Director of Educational Services.
Well, good evening, board and cabinet, and the few of you in the audience. We're going to have some conversation this evening about LCAP, Local Control and Accountability Plan. Next slide. So this is the beginning of a 3-year cycle. It was supposed to have begun last school year, but as we all know, we've had many of our tasks interrupted, and we completed a learning continuity plan instead of an LCAP. But now we are back on track to start the 3-year cycle. So why an LCAP? The purpose of the LCAP is to assure that we are looking at performance, which is what Cindy was speaking to in terms of those accountability measurements. That we have equity, we're looking at our most in need populations, our unduplicated students, which would be our English learners, our socioeconomically disadvantaged, our foster, our homeless, and often military. I'll also put in there because they're often transient. And then that we're always looking at improvement.
Those are the three legs of the LCAP and what it is really designed to focus on. So performance, equity, and improvement. Next slide. Some of these you've seen before, but just a reminder in terms of how some of these pieces fit together. The dashboard, which we talked about earlier in the year, which was extremely abbreviated this year because of lack of measurements as a result of the COVID pandemic. But the dashboard or whatever local data we have, which is the next one, to help us drive the LCAP, which is where we would put actions and services in place in response to the dashboard and the local data for the ultimate goal of improving student outcomes. That's how they're all supposed to work together. Next slide. And this is all part of what we call the plan, do, study, act cycle. So the goal of this is that we would plan some strategies, some actions, and some services in our LCAP. We would do those strategies and then monitor them along the way and make notes about what we're seeing in terms of plans implementation. Study those things with our leadership teams, with our site teams, with the board, and then act. Do things differently as a result of the data, keep doing things as a result of the tweak things a little bit in response to the data with the ultimate purpose of improvement. And just keep that cycle going is the idea. Next slide. This is all part of a system that we look at in terms of universal design for learning, removing barriers for students. And we want to make sure that we're looking at a multi-tiered approach. So we're looking at academic outcomes, we're looking at behavioral outcomes, and we're also looking at social emotional outcomes, because we need to have all of those areas addressed in order for our students to be successful. And we want to have a base core understanding that all students get a certain level of access, and then those students who need additional support get that second tier of access, and then those the most in need would get that third tier of access. Next slide. This year we developed the portrait of a graduate, which is a portrait showing the key skills that our students need to have in order for them to be successful in life, whether that be college, career, military, whatever they just family, whatever they decide to do once they leave us. And we have the puzzle pieces in the middle because we're all part of the puzzle for our students to be able to reach those outcomes and to develop those skills. Next slide. All right, so this evening I'm going to give you some resources for your discussion in terms of where we've been this year related to LCAP stakeholder meetings and some of the input that we have gathered. So next slide. The first thing is to just give you an idea of the stakeholder meetings that we've held this year, and some of you have been participants or observers as part of that process. So we had observers. So we had a meeting on January 14th where we talked about the purpose, the process, the timeline, and reviewed the dashboard data. February 11th, we looked at our district goals and some components about telling our district story. March 9th, we reviewed current LCAP actions and services that are being proposed and the needs assessment. And then this evening, I'm going to share some information with you about the outcomes from those meetings. And then we'll have a summing it all up. We have another LCAP stakeholder meeting scheduled in April, and then we'll have our public hearings in June. Next slide. This slide is some input that we gathered from our DLAC parents. I will confess, we have been struggling this year to get participation at our DLAC meetings, and I think our ELAC meetings and just parent meetings in general. But we did have one meeting where we did have some parents who were present, and we looked at some data related to recommendations that they had as parents coming from the English learner group. So the DLAC is kind of a subcommittee of the LCAP stakeholders meeting, and we gathered LCAP data from that particular group. And then we couple that with what is discussed at the LCAP stakeholders and always invite them to attend those as well if they choose to do so. So you can see in the possible reasons for the result, what we did is we looked at a particular data source. We identified the findings from that data source. We talked about what were some desired outcomes, and then they gave some suggestions or some possible reasons why we might be getting those results so that we might be responsive to those reasons. And it was, like I say, we only had a few parents there, so getting feedback was a little challenging. We would love to have that parent group, all parent groups, increase in our numbers in terms of their participation. So that's one piece of information. Next slide. One of the other things we did at our very last stakeholders meeting is we did what's called a Jamboard. And what I really like about a Jamboard is it provides an opportunity for people to share their thoughts and their ideas anonymously. Oftentimes we can be biased by either who has given the suggestion or I just, because we're our human nature sometimes. So it's nice to be able to have people give their input without that factor. So what we did is we had people based on the three goals or the three priorities. The first one being learning, increasing student learning and supporting professional development. The second goal being facilitate safe and positive school climate. And the third priority being engaging our families and our community. Based on the actions and services that we had already identified as potential LCAP strategies, we had them give input at what some other ideas that they might have in those areas. So this was just a brainstorm where they, for about, 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes, people just put post-it notes all over the Jamboard. And then we asked them to put a check mark if they read somebody else's idea and went, oh, I really like that idea. Then they could put a check mark there. So that's why you see some of the sticky notes with check marks and others that may not have that. So this was just an opportunity for the people participating in the stakeholders committee to share their ideas related to potential actions and services.
This is super cool.
Yeah. Okay, next slide. So the next piece of information I'd like to give you. So this is a grid, and you also have this electronically in your board folder, but this looks at all of the three priority areas and the actions and services that are suggested for going into the LCAP for the next 3-year cycle. Some of these you will recognize because they were from our previous LCAP. So we weren't going to throw away the old LCAP and start completely over from scratch because there were some components of that we felt needed to be continued, that we hadn't quite realized they still had work to be done there. So some you will recognize because they've been repeated. And then there's the ideas that came from the Jamboard. Some of those you may see already in actions and services, and some may be potential for additional actions and services. So the first document is the proposed LCAP actions and services to this point for you to consider. And then the last page, next slide, would be the metrics. So how are we measuring our progress in these areas? So one of the things we've recognized from our last LCAP cycle was that we had so many metrics. Sometimes they say if you measure everything, you measure nothing. So we're trying to determine what are those metrics, and that's why at the very top of the paper, I've labeled it LCAP. Well, that's another thing we're doing right now. That's a part. Yeah, that's it. It just happened. It's true. LCAP. LCAP metrics, we believe, will have a positive impact on student outcomes. We want to try to collect the data that we believe will be the most impactful to make needed change. Now, you'll see that some of the metrics are in black and some of them are in red. Some of these metrics are given to us at the state level. They're not an option for whether or not we look at them as a metric. So we've included them because there are things that we have to be looking at these things. So those are in black. The ones in red are the ones that we have added that we believe are important for us to look at to monitor our students' progress. in addition to the ones that are mandated at the state level. Any questions about that? Anything I've said to this point? No? Okay. Cindy, one of the things you were asking about is the assessment component. So maybe we should ask about that. We're actually in the process of, making some decisions because the state has filed a waiver, and there's information about this in your Friday update tomorrow. But the state has not yet filed the waiver, but will be, to waive the requirements of having to get the task. It's not a blanket waiver. They're not saying you can't do any kind of assessment, but you don't have to give the task is what they're asking for. But if you're going to give an alternative assessment, it can't just be any old assessment. It has to have some certain criteria that it's aligned to in terms of aligned with Common Core. It has to be disaggregated data. It has to be able to be administered across multiple grade spans. So we're looking at what measurements do we have locally that would meet that requirement. One of the things you'll see on here is the STAR for grade 3. And at many of the county meetings and state meetings I attend, STAR and something called iReady are two assessments that are very commonly looked at as being very comprehensive quality assessments. We have been giving them at the elementary level for quite some time, and elementary is way further along in terms of their assessment calendaring. They regularly give STAR 4 times a year. They have writing benchmarks. They also have some other checkpoints that they're giving. So we're further along in the elementary world. So we're trying to expand that in the secondary world. So actually, I met this week with our secondary principals, and next year we're going to be expanding the STAR administration across first through 9th. So we'll be introducing it at the 9th grade level. 6th, 7th, and 8th have been dabbling with it this year, but next year it will be mandated. 9th grade will be getting it so that we can assess at the very beginning of the year. There'll be a screening tool to determine where the students are in the beginning of the year. And then it'll be given another 2 or 3 times, we haven't got the calendar yet, to progress monitor throughout the year. And then we'll add 10th grade the next year, 11th grade the next year. So we're not going to do everybody at high school at this point. We didn't know that we had the capacity to do that. Moving forward. So bringing 6th, 7th, and 8th grade on mandated, and then also 9th grade. So we'll have that data to help us know where our students are in terms of the learning loss component.
So until 10th and 11th come on board, what are we doing for those grade levels?
So what we're looking to do there is most likely, and I have sent communication out to our teachers with this information, and I have said it's not set in concrete yet because there's still more guidance, just like Jen was talking about the budget end of the house. The same is true of the assessment end of the house. So we're still getting guidance. And I have webinars every week, sometimes 2 or 3 in a week. But the last one I attended, they're saying that, or based on the guidance we've had to this point, I think what is the most viable option for us to meet all the criteria would be that we could give STAR, we are getting STAR, but we could use STAR at the elementary grades for the assessment requirement because they have that system very well in place. We do not have a system enough in place, even though we've been doing it at the middle school. It's not consistent. So we'll probably need to give CAS. And we will give CAS in 11th grade. Because I believe that is the assessment that is going to give us the most information. It's been abbreviated, which is good. They're decoupling the accountability component so we can truly use it as an instructional tool without the stigma of the dashboard attachment to it. So I think that will help. We also are looking at administering the ICAs, which are the interim comprehensive assessments. We can't use the interim assessment blocks because they're too short. But the comprehensive assessments, we had actually planned to give those to our 9th and 10th graders so that they don't have 2 years of no testing before they take it in 11th grade. In a COVID environment, I'm not sure how we're going to pull that off this year, so we may not be able to phase that in until next year. We've got to noodle that idea around, but at minimal, we'll be giving 11th graders CAS, most likely middle school CAS, and an elementary PP STAR. That's kind of our thinking at this point.
I remember, oh, right. mentioning, it's either you're one of the hosts is talking about the MVTP. Is that something also that's being looked at as that assessment or math?
That is something that I know math is getting, and we're not sure yet if they're going to allow for grade by grade assessment options, or if it's going to have to be a grade span. So originally we heard it would need to be, 3 through 5, consistent, 3 through, or 6 through 8, consistent, and then 11th grade, well, they're the only one, so theirs could be consistent. So there's potential that we could use the MVTP for math rather than CAS, but we haven't had that conversation yet. But in today, yesterday webinar, I went to, gave some indication that we might be able to do it by grade level. But it just can't be this grade doing this grade doing it. There has to be consistency, and the report has to be able to be reported out in our school accountability report card. So it has to be disaggregated, the ability to be disaggregated, and it has to be aligned with standards.
Now, there's the star for math too, because
Yes.
it's a math requirement.
We have star reading and star math.
Okay, because right here it just says reading, so. I was just-
Yeah, and the reason that we put that in terms of we may want to expand the use of STAR in terms of an LCAP metric. We were using it more consistently in the past in reading, and we put third grade reading because we know what the research indicates in terms of the statistics related to third grade proficiency, that students who are reading proficiently by grade 3 have a much stronger likelihood of being academically successful in the future. So we targeted third grade specifically for that reason. That's why it's the one that's in the LCAP.
Now, historically, there's sometimes problems with getting all students tested. Is as far as our receiving of the funding or being able to make sure that we're getting the data that we need, is there a certain percentage of students we need to have tested? Or is
Aren't we leaving that? Well, the 95% participation rate is still a requirement, but it is not going to count against us if we don't meet it.
and then also how they, I know historically at times, student groups have just kind of gone through the motion. It hasn't been high stakes for them. So the information that we receive from the testing isn't necessarily actionable.
Which is what Cindy was speaking to, is that whatever we can do to help our kids, it's not meant to be attached to their grade. But if you don't have some sort of carrot or some reason for it to be important to kids, and that's really, in my thinking, it's a lot about the messaging that we do with our students to try to give them reasons why it can be important to them in terms of the way the data is used. If they're not going to college, that's not a reason for it, because college-bound kids, it's their EAP. So for them, it's, there's a very reason there for them to do their best. But we have to try to make it meaningful and go to grade level, which can be challenging, because the data is only as good as the effort that gets put into the assessment.
And for me, because the UCs are doing away with SAT, ACT, and they are having that conversation about what will they use as an admissions test. And it's kind of being talked about using the SBAT. And if our 11th graders are not taking that seriously, then they're shooting themselves in the foot if they wish to apply to UC the next year. So that to me is concerning, is making sure they understand any potential consequences, unintended or real consequences.
Well, and we have some students on our LCAP stakeholder team, and they said, how do we get this out to our peers need to know how important this test is to take it seriously. So I think messaging at the teacher level, messaging at the parent level, messaging at all of those levels to make them see the importance of doing their.
And that's the same in the last couple of years on Set Council. The students have said the same thing. And we get very frustrated when they find out that some of their friends are messing around on the test and just doing, and they're trying really hard because they know it's important.
And even knowing that our community is judged based on the dashboard, the California dashboard, and that dashboard is a direct reflection of how our 11th graders and how our students perform in the past is the color designation that we get on the Now, I mean, if you're a fourth, fifth grader or an eighth grader, maybe that's not very relevant to you. But trying to help them understand at the level that they can comprehend that, you know, as a community, people make judgments about our community, be that right or wrong, and whatever your perspective is in terms of whether that's the way it should be or not, that's the reality, is that there are judgments made about our schools and about our community based on those dashboards.
I know, in past years, there have been some teachers for the juniors who have encouraged students, of course, to do as well as they can, but put some sort of a retroactive grading component so that if they, not to drop a grade, but raising a grade if they've done stellar on that testing.
We've done that for AP too.
Yeah, so I don't know, that's, you know, teachers grading is their own.
And really, I mean, the transition to the CAS and the sort of idea of continuous improvement, the state really doesn't want us using the data in that way. They really want us using it in a formative way.
Okay.
But if we can't get the kids to take it seriously because there's no state put on it, then is it really formative? So I mean, we kind of have a vicious cycle there.
Yeah.
But that's also why we want to have the STAR data in addition to the CAS data, because really we want to have multiple data points. We also want to have local data that the teachers are doing in terms of the common formative assessments and still using the IABs, still using assessments that teachers have developed in their PLCs that have been tested so that we have formative level data, we have benchmark level data, we have summative level data, because everybody has a bad day and you don't have to judge based on your performance on one test. That's not really fair. None of us would want that. So multiple measure assessments to help us know where our students are and where we need to help them go. So this first page is just the assessments themselves and sort of some of the pieces that we're going to look at in terms of how we're progressing in these three priority areas. The second part of this is just an example of how we need to make these measurable. So these are just, I put up the very top in red, these are examples of measurable outcomes. These are for demonstration purposes only and are not actual outcomes that we've established. But for example, you know, we want to move closer to more of our students scoring at level 3, which is the proficiency benchmark. So we have to decide, well, here's our baseline. We want to get how many more kids closer to 3. We have to have something that are measurable. Suspension rates, you know, this is the percent of our students who are being suspended. We want to reduce that by 3%, by 2%. So we'll have to be making some decisions about what's a reasonable amount to try to achieve. You know, the Kelvin survey data, we've been saying we want more people to participate in those. So, you know, we have 75% of our staff members participating, we'd like to move to 80%, or we have 40% of our students who want to move to 50%, or whatever that might be. So this is just an example of some of the outcomes that we'll need to write, you know, from, you know, with all these metrics that are on the front page, we'll have to have measurable statements that we can put so that we can see how are we doing in terms of moving in that direction.
So this is always, I always talk about this all the time, so it's nothing new to have it, but the A through G completion rate, that data is so concerning on so many levels for our unduplicated students, especially in our Hispanic student group as well. But overall, I mean, the last data that was presented is 26% of our students. And it doesn't mean to say, I'm not saying that every student wants to go to college, maybe they have a different trajectory, and that's fine, but when they get to senior year, they need to have their options open so they can make those choices based upon what their interest is. And we're being judged on how ready we're getting our kids, college and career. And to have 26% of our students being eligible to apply to a 4-year is concerning. We're below county and state, and I know our students are smart. They're awesome. So, and this is not putting blame anywhere. It's like, the idea of messaging. How do we change the messaging and that mindset that, hey, get a C and better and take those A through G classes, doesn't mean not go to college, but at least you have a choice your senior year. And it's, to me, that A through G completion rate, especially for our undergraduate students, is just so important. And I harp on it all the time, and I know, but we just have to have those conversations with our students, with our families, with I know that the counselors are now every student, every year, that's their mantra.
So it really starts with ninth graders planning that path.
Yes.
through the year.
Yes.
So that's good. We have our principal, our high school principal here in the audience this evening. And as you notice, the A through G grades is one of the ones in black. That is one of our, that is a mandated one in terms of it's part of the preparedness one, causing for preparedness on the dashboard, the causing for indicator is the A through G grades. And so it really does start with those ninth graders pacing out their plan to assure that they are, taking those courses that are A through G, and those courses that we have that aren't A through G, what do we need to make them A through G? We need to offer more of those.
I would argue actually it could start at the 7th or 8th grade level too, especially with having, AVID and MPH, but also just having that mindset. I know MPH is taking
So the mindset starts at the middle school, and then the actual coursework starts, and then you hit the.
So frankly, I know in some school districts, the coursework for A through G can begin at the middle school level if it was available to our students. That would be something potentially to allow for us and not have, because I know traditionally the junior year, 11th grade, the academics are just crazy as far as college prep. But if I know with shrinking enrollment, it's a difficult thing to imagine. But if we were to say be able to start offering foreign language at the middle school level, it would lighten some of the academic heaviness of the later years of secondary, and possibly in some ways help with the A through G completion. So I don't know, just
and one of the things too, with all of, our district data is only as good as our site data. So really being able to have these conversations at the site level, because that's where this work happens. So being more diligent in terms of sharing, these are our outcomes, these are our goals, these are our targets, we have one high school and one continuation high school. So between those two, that's what gives us our district data. We have one middle school. So our middle school data is our district data. We have 3 elementary schools. So our elementary schools combined, that's our district data. So if they aren't cognizant of these goals and these strategies and these outcomes, it's not going to happen at the district level if it doesn't happen at the site level. So really strengthening our site teams and our site leadership teams to build their capacity to drive their schools to be able to have these pieces in place that are going to have these metrics met. So I think the last slide was just a little clock that said, now it's time for you to discuss. We've already started a little bit of that, but I just wanted to share with you kind of where we are in the LCAP process, some of the information we've gathered from some of the stakeholders, and then I think this is the opportunity where you as a board discuss LCAP input. Well, I already told you. I'll put a strike in.
Yeah, big asterisk on that. Because I think,
so that's what we want to keep. Is that what you're saying, Cindy? We want to keep that?
and where is the target that we want to get at? I know that school districts that have put some focus in it, Chiefy Unified is one because they got a Golden Valley Award, and I saw their graphs, and they started at about 22% of their students needing the A through G, and they put the energy and resources and whatever that was, a plan together, and within 10 years, they're now at 72% of their students. And so I look at that success story and say, okay, what kind of success story can we build for ourselves to achieve that same result? Because I think that our students, we could see a 72% meeting A through G. Not to say that 72% of our students are going on to a 4-year, but they have the option And the RFP CTE completers, the completers of those pathways, that percentage is much higher than our A2G completion rate. And so if we're college and career, I know people say, well, not every kid's gonna go to college, but look at the imbalance that we have going on. It's like we have to focus on this part of it. And what was concerning to me as well is in the LA Times, they were talking about a lot of students choosing community college, which is a great option, but there's a caveat. There is a high rate of dropout, 1 in 5 students, because of whatever reason, if they get a job, they're on a different path, they're like, oh, I don't need to keep going. I have plans of transferring to a 4-year, but you know what, I'm good to go. And so, but then later in life, they might see the consequences of that choice. And so it's just trying to make sure that we are addressing both sides equitably.
Well, and what you're speaking to is exactly what we have to do here on the examples page on the back side, is that we have to decide what is that percentage rate going to be. We're not going to say we're going to be 72%
No,
by next year. That's like you said, 10 years to get there. So if we're at 26%, what do we believe is that next jump so we have to decide,
Right.
you know, what is that percentage?
I'm done harping on this subject, sorry. And especially making sure that we reach and we have a conversation with our Hispanic students, our EL students and their parents, because that was an interesting dialogue a year, 2 years ago, maybe in an ELAC meeting at Rhode High. The the EL parents were talking about barriers in taking the ELD class that takes up 1 slot on their schedule. So it precluded some of these students from going into an added class to get that college support, and they want their kids to go to college. Not that I'm saying they can't pull them out of ELD. I'm just saying is that the desire is there, but that piece, like, how do I help my kid? How do I traverse this path when I didn't go to college? And that's for any group, but I'm just saying is that was a really good conversation here.
And it's kind of one of the actions we added for next year is to facilitate annual English learner goal setting and encouragement workshops twice a year to promote knowledge of the process and motivation for reclassification. So that's something I've been talking about with Ron Ohio in my department. And so that's something she and I could easily do, where we go and I used to do this in an elementary principal, where I'd sit down with a student and say, you want to be classified? Well, let's look at what you, and they had no idea. They didn't know what he didn't know what he didn't do, what the criteria was. And I did that with a few students and they all reclassified. I like to think I had something to do with that. It had nothing to do with me, I don't know. But it did seem to help the student to sit side by side with them with the computer and say, you need to have a level 4 in the LCAP. You need to have a proficient writing score. You need your grades to be at a C or better for your language arts courses, and you need to have a passing benchmark score. And you have 3 of the 4 of those. You just need to get your writing score right. You have the other things already mastered. Oh, well, that's doable. I can make that happen. Or you've got to keep those grades up to a C. You've got all the other pieces you just are missing, and that gives them the ability to say, oh, that's a goal that's reasonable that I can master. So if we do that with all of our level 4 kids on the LCAP who are ready and eligible to reclassify, that I believe can really help them set a goal, set a target, check in with them partly through the year, how are you doing, and get more of our kids reclassified. But we could also throw in that whole A through D component at the high school level in terms of giving them information about that at the same time.
Yeah, because, I mean, obviously, if they had added, we see the success with added with our students, and especially our first generation students. We have students going to UCLA and Berkeley, not to say that any, San Diego State, any other schools, but it's just the fact that first generation
university.
they're going. I still want more at USC, but that's another discussion. But the issue is that we know that avid support works. And it is very one-on-one. And so if we have that kind of bridge to our EL parents, and as we try to increase parent engagement, our Hispanic parents as well, because I think that people just, they're a little tentative in asking for what, they don't even know what to ask. I think that's the biggest part.
Well, and as you look over the things, I mean, you may have things come to mind as you have time to mull some of this over. Some of you are seeing this for the first time. Some of you have been part of our participants or not participants, observers in the LCAP stakeholder meeting. So if something comes to mind as you mull over this, I mean, certainly there's opportunities to give feedback. Our next meeting is on the 13th of April.
And the other thing is math.
No,
Has the same concern with math. Again, our high school, our 11th graders need to take that test seriously because more than 15.9% could meet or exceed the math standard, and they're just doodling or something. I don't know.
Well, and that's why our math department, they're looking at new materials because they feel like the current materials don't have any tech components associated with it. And they don't know that it's completely aligned with standards. So they're reviewing a couple of different options right now and have a plan for potentially launching new materials for next school year as a means of addressing what because they're concerned about the same thing.
And I'm excited that the AP courses are doing the same thing. They're getting new textbooks that more closely align with the changes in the AP curriculum to get them for the test. So I think that we're going to see some improvement in the AP exam pass rates because we are using those textbooks as the source. I'm super excited about that. About the new textbook.
Little by little, we're getting there.
Heather, I appreciate the work you're doing and the work that the team is doing. In fact, I think that the items in red are really important as we do the extra assessment tools, because obviously CASP is only just one piece, and there's so much more that has to be looked at, especially this year for all levels. So thank you. And I especially appreciate the students and the work that they've been doing as they've been participating in this process.
Adding on to what Bill was talking about, the D upgrades, having that as something that we're tracking, I think is incredibly important, especially if that becomes the start of a conversation. So because it ties into students' emotional well-being, and I think that's a crisis that's brewing right now. So having that be something we focus on without lowering our standards, but having a better understanding of what's behind the students not passing, and again, having a way of being able to then so what it to be able to have that be a spur for more action.
And we actually had a large group of people from RIM attend a grading summit that was coordinated at the county level, where we were with several other schools having conversations about this very topic. And it was really great to have a conversation about, why are we, like you say, it prompts the conversation, and what are some maybe changes in our practices and policies that we need to do to address that, not lowering the standard, but giving more opportunities for students to truly demonstrate what they know and are able to do all along the semester.
And I think at our next board meeting, I'm going to add an agenda item for a future board meeting to see if you can report back possibly. If Ms. Burke could also talk about what has been happening here in terms of the grading committee, because I think that is something that would be really interesting to learn more about.
So one thing I just wanted to touch on is the attendance rate at events, which is attendance at events is obviously limited at this point in time. But that parent engagement piece and just how important it is as a parent to show investment and interest and understanding of your kids' education, and whatever we can do within, guidelines nowadays to have that open door policy where parents are encouraged to come onto campus as much as possible. Obviously not interfering with the educational process, but for special events so they can feel like our campuses are part of their home, that there's some ownership to it, I think that, that will go a long way too. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
So,
Am I right in thinking that we just did 8.37 direction, board LCAP discussion, board of trustees, okay? Consider that retroactive.
Yeah. Thanks again, Heather, for answering all those questions, because especially the assessments, that because it's going to tie into these plans and addressing the learning loss and the data-based, the research-based programs or actions, and it's super important. And like I said, I'm passionate and making sure that our students are ready for their post-secondary chapter of their life. Once they walk across that stage or drive through one or the other, for us to be able to do our best job to have them make the decision fall of senior year, and they have every single option possible, and that we've given them those options. And so it's super important to me to make sure that they have that ability to make the best choice for themselves. Or be a knucklehead and just do exactly the opposite, but that's okay, they're still their choice.
9.1, action 9.0, action calendar. 9.1, business services, approval to accept and sign a proposal from TransFinder for the purchase of a student transportation management software program. Fiscal impact not to exceed $12,490. District Office COVID-19 Relief Fund. Now,
Second.
no, discussion.
Can we get a quick overview of this? For those that might not know.
Okay, I can give you a quick overview. We also have Jen Keywell for something that I can't answer on the ready if we need to, say, hey, help, okay? But right now, we currently use, in 2000, the end of 2019-20 school year, we purchased, and some of you may remember, our first real, transportation software package called TransTracks. So we haven't used TransTracks for quite even a year yet, but in working through it from what we have done, it prompted us to look at some other options because we're finding it very difficult, not as user friendly, and it seems like the technology behind it isn't what we anticipated, and made a little bit more work for our staff, both in transportation and in business, actually. So in November, we actually had a presentation from TransFinder. They're one of the largest transportation software developers really on the market. And at that time, there was not sure of the funding, can't take on something new. I think everyone just had their plates full. And so we revisited the conversation in February. So we had another presentation done by the vendor with some real life. We had bus pass, field trips, Jen and her staff at different times be run through some scenarios and some just, I can't think of the word right now, but, kind of a slideshow and a proposal of what they had to offer. One of the neat things that TransFinder has is we're kind of coming into it with the ability to use COVID funds, but in the long run, it's really after the startup fees, which a lot's being waived by jumping on the proposal now. It's actually it's going to be about $500 a year savings compared to what we're spending now because of the little tiny things, like as we add a user, it's unlimited users. There's more modules that we are finding that's not an extra, well, that's $50 a month, that's $100 extra, that's a different piece. And we have a separate piece of software that we have on our website for School Finder, where someone can type in their address and it tells you what elementary school it goes to. Well, this is a color all in one. So TransFinder has that, so we won't be using two softwares. And then a couple neat things is they geomap our students, and they geomap our based on the addresses, and they input, there's a lot of input. They will input our stops that we currently have, and they will look at routes to safe routes to schools. So right now, a lot of that's done by hand by Jen Kaywell and her staff. And so it may say, Johnny lives off of, X street, and you have him at bus stop, Y. But really, he has to cross a major highway. So it has built-in alerts that may say, the parent may think that's the best stop or maybe a closer stop, and it will allow us some of that data to analyze. It will make suggestions if we want to look at different routing. So it does some projections for us. And then a neat thing is that, like, as kids matriculate into different campuses, right now, Jen has to, by hand, take all the 8th graders, find out where they live, and see how that impacts her routes for the high school. And I never really realized how much they did by hand in that department. So this will, it integrates with our Aries software, and a student database will be like an everyday upload. It might even be more, on the hour, I'm not quite sure, but at least daily. So then it will be like, okay, you can run scenarios with what's my next year's ninth graders and where do they live. And so it really helps us. And I was excited because right now we may be able to use this software for other uses than transportation. And I'm looking at Anna because, we geomapped our students before and used it to say, well, where do they live? And where, can we make decisions on that? So that was an added plus. It actually has, each bus will come with a transponder that our mechanics can install, or we can have the company install, and it will, we will have like a GPS on our buses, so we can know, okay, bus 12 is still down in Crestline. And maybe why is a road closed and a tree fall on the highway, you're out of a radio network or whatever. So it helps us monitor that. It has some ability to add modules on later as funding permits, where we can get iPads in each of the buses, and it could be paper, like a cardless bus passes, although that does take a little bit of time for the driver because there's pictures that come up. But then in addition to that, we could have they partner with a company called Zonar, and Zonar is an actual bus pass with chips in them, and you swipe it on and off the bus. So you can say, well, Mike got off at Lake Gregory and Lake Drive, and he was supposed to go to Dad's this weekend or this Friday, and he got off on the wrong stop. So it could actually give us real-time data. Now that's not part of this, but there's some growth with this program over what we're using currently. Included in this program is a messaging system that parents, it's not just one way. Right now we send email blasts or parents prayer blasts one way to parents, because Route 12 is late. Now, not only can that happen, but then parents it's two-way messaging that can say, hey, is bus 12 running late? Instead of right now, they're calling the school site's calling transportation. And then the site secretaries and principals can have a little more access to find out what kids are where without having to pick up the phone and call. They will have that data. So.
I would love that part of it because often we get blasts and we don't have kids who drive buses. And you get 20 blasts about buses being late because there's weather, and these would only go to the buses or the parents who it's affecting, which would be great.
There you go.
So the $12,490, is that the license for a certain amount of time, or what is that for?
That startup and first year costs. And with that, we're getting quite a few. I'd have to read through it. I don't have it all on the top of my head, but we're getting 8 hours of consulting fees added, of consulting time added on, and some discounts. And because technology is upgrades, is an allowable use on some of the COVID costs, we're like, you know, now it's not a general fund expense. We might be able to improve efficiency and down the line even improve some safety. I mean, this will just in the routing improve safety, but have some opportunities for building on the product. One of the neat things that Zonar has, if we ever go there, is they actually, because their systems are in both White Fleet, we chose it, and Bussy, there's state laws that we can only idle for so long. So like we have to monitor how long our buses idle, because that's adding pollution to the air, where they monitor, you know, is there something wrong with the stoplight? Is there something wrong with the route? Are we spending too much time at one stop just waiting you know, out of compliance with our idling times? I mean, little things you learn over the years in transportation.
Jenny, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought this actually allows the parents to see where the bus is on their route.
I believe so, but it's not like where your student is.
No, but where the bus is, so like if they're waiting to see, is it coming, is it, you know, 2 stops away from our stop?
Yes, and it's only as good as the range too. So we have some pockets in the mountain that there might be some delays.
That's, I did see that. I was really excited. I was really excited about seeing this in general, and I was very curious to hear how it compared to today's operations. So thank you for that. As far as live tracking goes, I think that's going to be great and going to become kind of an expected norm, because Mountain Transit, our only public transit agency on the mountain, also provides live tracking of where your bus is. And that's through an app called Double Map. So I think for a school district to be able to offer that as well, was really first class.
We mentioned you, Jordan, in our conference call with them, that we said, you know, we need your quote to have a lot of information, you know, because we have a very informed, board member that's highly technical, and he was actually excited. He's like, well, I'd probably like to talk to him one day, you know, and love to work with him.
On that proposal, I was really impressed by just their user interface and the screenshots of the little dashboard area. Oftentimes, especially in software that's sold to public agencies like school districts or, you know, government entities, they don't spend that time on that. They think, well, I can get away with it because it's a much less competitive marketplace. So I'm really pleased to see that they invested that time. That often indicates something good. And we've seen that with some other software that we've used too, like Persolis, you know, they've spent some time on the UI. That was really nice. And Kelvin especially, I was really, so I think if history is any indicator, the fact that they're investing that time shows how invested they are in the application itself. Because like I said, there's a lot of vendors out there that will say, I'm going to do the bare minimum and I'm going to be the cheapest so that I win. But the fact that they spend the time on this was really nice to see.
And so far, and Jen has had a lot more conversations and working with them than I have, but just on the few times that I jumped on a call or a presentation, their customer service and their personal touch and wanting to get to know you and work with you, you know, you definitely left feeling like, oh, we have someone who wants to take care of us, which is sometimes, you know, nice. And it's going to save us money.
And that was exactly the next thing that I was going to say is, you know, with those softwares, you think of the ones that are going to spend their time on developing something really good for districts. Well, that oftentimes means more money, but this being a flat fee cost structure, not a per seat cost structure, where most SaaS models are going these days, that was really another thing that kicked this, I think, for me, saying this is going to be valuable, because almost every SaaS subscription these days is, well, how many people are going to be using it? We're going to limit you on that, and then you try to find a way, well, can we get away with 2 people on it? Well, maybe not having to worry about that, I think is going to lead to much better use of the system.
And that's what we found with transcripts, and I feel bad publicly even comparing them, because they have actually been lovely, and customer service has been, they've been very great to work with and gracious, but as we need to add on the site secretaries for the field trips, and a couple principals need to be added on, I need to be added on, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh, that's $50 a month per user, and it really added up quick.
Yeah.
So we found that out too.
You all ready
I'm
to vote?
excited, thanks.
Okay, for 9.1, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passed unanimously. So 10.0, future meeting dates. Regular board meeting, April 15th, 2021 at 5:30 p.m. Will be broadcast through YouTube, limited in-person attendance at the Rim High School Library. Regular board meeting will be on May 6th, 2021 at 4 p.m. YouTube. Limited in-person attendance at the Rim High School Library. The percentages can be based on what tier we're in, and basically we're going to be following what the schools are doing in terms of percentages and the like. We need to be able to make sure we're in compliance. All
The
future
guidelines for adults have remained at 6 feet, and that's what the chairs currently are. They are not changing those. I was on a webinar yesterday with the CDC, and the scientist from there was speaking about adult versus student footage.
it's good to know.
All future meetings will be held via YouTube, and there will be limited in-person attendance at the Rim High School Library for the public until executive orders change regarding gatherings. 11.0, adjournment.
I make a motion to adjourn this meeting at 6:30.
Second. All in favor?